Hello, everyone. I'm Benjamin Samuel, Bomb Magazine's managing editor. Thank you all for joining us. If you're new to Room with a View or to Bomb Magazine, welcome. We're especially glad you're here. And if you're familiar with Bomb and returning, thank you for coming back and thank you for your ongoing support. Since 1981, Bomb has been delivering the voices of exciting and exceptional artists and writers, including Mattilda Bernstein Sycamore, whose new book, The Freezer Door, is absolutely stunning. And although Mattilda herself has been a frequent contributor to Bomb in the past, including her interviews with T. Fleischman and Mackenzie Wark, we were thrilled to have her interviewed for Bomb 154, which is our upcoming winter issue. That'll be out on December 15th. And you can see actually a preview of her interview on our website now. In that interview, which was conducted by Amy Gall, Mattilda says that she strives to break down language in order to express what cannot be expressed otherwise, and reveal the gaps between feeling and longing, longing and loss, loss and dreaming. And that's just one of many, many really powerful quotes and moments in that interview. So it's an amazing conversation, and I encourage you all to read the interview as well as The Freezer Door, Mattilda's also amazing book, and subscribe to Bomb and order our winter issue. But tonight, we're actually certain to have another amazing conversation with Mattilda, thanks to our other special guest, Jordy Rosenberg, author of Confessions of the Fox. I saw Jordy read at Pioneer Works back in the before time, when we could all gather in person over at Pioneer Works. And it was an exceptional reading, and thinking about that today made me realize just how much I miss going to in-person events, but I'm also grateful for virtual events like these. So thank you, Jordy. Thank you, Mattilda, for joining us. In a moment, we're going to bring Mattilda on screen for a brief reading, and then she'll be joined by Jordy for a conversation. After that, we'll take questions from the audience. You can submit your questions anytime if you click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And feel free to leave messages also in the general chat over in the side of your screen. In fact, if you're up for it, feel free to say hello to Jordy and Mattilda. Let us know where you're watching us from. We'd love to hear from you. And we'll also be sharing links in the chat of where you can buy books from tonight's authors. We're going to be working with the amazing independent bookstore Greenlight in Brooklyn. So please support them and support our authors. And that's all for me. I'll see you all again at the end of the program. But let's bring Mattilda in and get ready for a great reading.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. It's funny, it's unusually bright here today in Seattle, so I was trying to give it an evening glow, but hopefully it will still read as somewhat evening-ish. I always like to say, when I do a regular reading, whatever you need to do to take care of yourselves, please do it. We all know that because we're in our homes, but what I hope is that we can bring the comfort of being at home and the connection of being together here in this room. So I'm going to read from a little bit from the book, and then we'll go from there. I'm going to read from about 24 pages into the book, about 24 pages. Suddenly remembering all those times when I reached my hand out for someone to crush me. Without the trauma of mandatory masculinity, what would I be? I still remember that cactus I threw out the window as a kid when it poked me, and then it just grew and grew. When I say, hi, my name's Mattilda, and then everything's over. It doesn't matter how hot he thought I was before, he will never think that way again. What would it be like without this damage? Over and over. I can't remember the last time someone asked what I would do if I was stuck on a desert island. Before I threw the cactus out the window, I found a worm on the sidewalk, and I was playing with it, pressing a stick into its squishy body to see which way it would move. I pressed a little harder, and it split in half. So then there were 2 worms. Was this possible? They were still moving around until I realized that worm was dead. I had killed it. I didn't want to kill anything ever again. I watched the ants building their cities, wondering what I look like to them. This city that is and isn't a city, but I guess that's what every city is becoming now. A destination to imagine what imagination might be like, except for the lack. Some terrible things are worse than other terrible things, but this doesn't mean we need more terrible things. Sometimes going to the grocery store makes me feel less alone. Sometimes I'm trying to tell someone about this new opening in my life, and I end up feeling closed. When I say opening, I mean the possibility that when I feel, I won't feel like I shouldn't feel. My body in a room with other bodies feeling me feeling my body. When I say room, I mean you. When I say you, I mean make room. On a good day, I write in sentences. On a bad day, I write in thoughts. You know when you're dreaming and past and present blend together in a way that makes it feel like maybe you can imagine a future? And then you wake up. Dreaming is not quite escape, not quite thinking, not quite feeling, or is it? Because sometimes I feel so much more hopeful when I'm asleep. Like this is the day when everything changes. I mean, once I wake up, or maybe I'm already awake, but not quite, because it's that possibility of living in 2 times or experiences at once, but in the same body. The one that lets me down as soon as I get out of bed. Every time I shave, I get the same shaving cut. It's like it's lying there dormant, waiting for the blade. I don't understand when I chop my finger instead of the onion. I don't understand why nothing heals. I'm kind of new to this, says the ice cube. Don't ever leave me, says the ice cube tray. I'm melting, says the ice cube. Why can't it always be this way, says the ice cube tray. Everyone likes me when I'm cold, says the ice cube tray. But I want to be fluid, says the ice cube. Hold me. I'm always holding you, says the ice cube tray. Then I want to live on my own, says the ice cube. No one appreciates me, says the ice cube tray. Explain gentrification to me, says the ice cube. Crushed ice, says the ice cube tray. What about global warming, asks the ice cube. Even I'm gonna melt, says the ice cube tray. Let's watch Olympic figure skating. Stop, you're giving me nightmares, says the ice cube. Cocktails, says the ice cube tray. You're mean, says the ice cube. Okay, ice maker. Slush, says the ice cube tray. Recycling, says the ice cube. Snow cone, says the ice cube tray. Okay, I'm sick of arguing, says the ice cube. We need a mediator. Can you believe some people put ice in their coffee, says the ice cube tray. I don't even want to talk about it, says the ice cube. But sometimes I wish you wouldn't squeeze me so tightly. Okay, I'll try to loosen up, says the ice cube tray. But I can't promise you won't slip away. Let's not think about that, says the ice cube. Is there anyone else around? Just us, says the ice cube tray. I like it best this way. Thank you.
Yay. Thank you, Mattilda. I keep expecting everyone else to be here, but it's just you and I, ice cube and ice cube tray. Here we are. Thank you for that amazing reading. There's a lot of applause in the chat. I want to just celebrate you for a second. This book has had an amazing launch so far. You're getting rave reviews in the Times and Washington Post. How does it feel so far, the launch?
Well, that feels great for sure, because this is actually my first book came out 20 years ago, and definitely the New York Times and the Washington Post have never covered me before. But also the way that they covered the book, that they're covering the book on the terms of the writing itself, that to me is incredible. And it just keeps going. So thank you all for being here tonight to make that keep happening. And for the interview in Bomb is absolutely incredible. It's just like these honors, and just the depth and the breadth of the engagement, but also the honesty and the embodiment and the intimacy and the rigor and all of those effects. And I think also, before I started, when the book was coming out, I thought, is it gonna feel like I have a book coming out? You know what I mean? In this moment. So these things, like bringing it into the world and feeling its effect in the world and getting a chance to talk to other people and have these conversations, that's of course why I write books, other than to stay alive, and so it's been exciting. Thanks for asking.
Yeah. No, it's been a really great launch so far, and I'm sure it'll only get greater. I want to talk to you a little bit about just, how you arrived at this form for the writing, and just learn a little from you about your process, because it really is like an incredibly formally interesting book. And I'm so curious in a way how you did it. There's like sections there's a great line. I mean, there's so many great lines. You wouldn't even know where to start, but toward the end, I had this thought like, oh, this whole book is just like Brecht, but funny, or funnier. And there's this line, outside there's a girl gang of shirtless boys jogging in their underwear. Is this the new wave of violent crime that everyone's talking about? I love that, because it's like that Brecht line, what's the crime of robbing a bank compared to the crime of founding a bank, right? But it's much snarkier the way you're putting it. And I love the idea of like shirtless girl gang of shirtless boys as this like wave of violent crime, but really, you're talking about gentrification, right? I love the compression and the humor of something like that. But I know you've talked about this book as variously. You described it as a lyric essay. You also, I think in an interview, maybe with Alex Chi, you said something about that you're kind of always trying to arrive at the most vulnerable way of telling a story, or an increasingly more vulnerable way of telling a story. I wonder if you could talk about how this book fits into that trajectory of vulnerability, and also just a little bit about how you understand it formally. Like what do you mean, I guess, when you call it a lyric essay? I'll probe later about like just how you came up with some of the formulations that you did.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think I call it a lyric essay because it circles around itself in search of an embodied truth. And it incorporates a lot of different forms, so memoir, fiction, criticism, poetry, but there isn't a delineation between them, it's all at once. And in writing the book, whenever I start a new book, I start writing without any intention of what I'm doing, and because I want the form to come through the process itself, to come through the language, to come through the ideas. I don't want to impose a form on the text. I want the text to create the form itself, right? And so I wrote, I think probably for a few years. I mean, of course, there are things that I become interested in, right? So I'm like interested in, or interested might be the wrong word there. I'm searching for certain things, you know, and coming up against walls, right? So there's the wall of gentrification, the wall of the way people interact in public and refuse to interact. There's, you know, desire and its impossibility. There's the body and its failure. There's the dream of queer and its failure to live up to that potential. There's dancing, there's Seattle, there's the neighborhood I live in, there's, you know, all these different things. The hypocrisy of gay male sexual culture and its allure nonetheless in some ways. Trauma, of course, trauma's always there. We got trauma. Childhood trauma, the trauma of existing in a world that wants you to disappear or die. And the trauma of imagining a community where one does not exist. And so those, but I just wrote, you know, and I didn't look at it as a whole until I thought that I had gotten somewhere. And I kind of remember when that happened, I was invited to this reading series called The Furnace in Seattle. And I've been writing for a couple of years. And The Furnace is one reader reading a piece to completion. And that season it was, had to be about Seattle. And so I thought, oh, well, this is the writing I've written about Seattle, so I better take a look. And so I took a look at the book, or whatever it was, the manuscript, the something, and the text. And I knew the part that I thought was the most polished, but it wasn't anywhere near the beginning of this text. It might have even been toward the end. And that's the part that became the beginning of the book. And it is this moment of realizing, thinking about like queerness. We talk about being queer and we say that desire is how it started, right? And I thought, well, if desire has brought me basically to walls at the moment, to living in queer worlds where my intellect is present, but I don't have an embodied self, then how do I find that? And so I start going into gay bars, which are spaces that I haven't gone in a long time because, you know, I don't drink, they're hideous, you know, in their mentality. But I remember having this, and it's in the book, where I have this deep sense of everything I knew, like the shade and the shame and the sadness, but then also there's a sweetness. And so in a way, the book becomes the exploration to find that sweetness, you know, wherever it is. But I guess just to go back to what you asked about the process, like I started, you know, then I wrote a couple more years probably before. And I looked at it recently and I was like, what is this? 1,000 pages of something, you know? And so like, I'm like, you know, I edited the whole thing like 10 or 15 times. Now, as you know, but other people might not, it's very compact. And, you know, there are pages that are just one sentence, you know, there are pages that are a paragraph. The whole thing altogether is like 260 pages or something. But I think it needed that process in order to get to this condensation. You know, because I don't think it would have gotten in the same place. You know, I edit to keep the spontaneity intact, but I'm always sculpting it at the same time.
Wow. I liked what you just said about that you're kind of circling around itself. The text is circling around itself in search of embodied truth. I think another thing you may have said in a recent interview was, you know, that you were writing from this place of loss around gentrification and this feeling that, I think this is a quote, that the book was about moving into the embodied feeling of loss of the idea of queer community building. So I'm curious, on the one hand, that the book is in search of kind of embodied truth, but this embodied truth might be a kind of embodied feeling of loss. Like it's not, the feeling of embodied truth is not necessarily like a good one. I'm wondering a little bit, maybe this is too much putting you on the spot, but if that feeling around sort of community and loss and embodiment has shifted since, you know, events of the recent past where we're in these, you know, intense sort of social isolation, but also kind of this outburst around mutual aid and the kind of like renewed emphasis on this idea of community building. And I don't know, if you've kind of reflected at all on the relationship between the losses articulated in the book and then this strange moment that we're in of like intense isolation, but these intense exhortations and desires around community building and mutual aid efforts. Is that something that you've thought about much since it came out?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think a lot of the book, it takes place in Seattle, and I am writing about what I call, what in Seattle is a term, the term in Seattle people use is Seattle freeze, right? And that's, but what I would call, and that's when you're walking down the street and you see someone, maybe you recognize each other and the other person just like this, or they look right at you and they look through you, or you even know them and they're like, oh, whatever. Obviously that happens everywhere, but to me, that's gentrification. It's the suburban imagination in the urban environment. It's the white picket fence in the eyes. And it's the way in which no one wants that sort of unplanned interaction that is really, to me, the point of being in a city, right? It's like you go outside and you find everything and everyone that you never imagined. Not what you imagined. I mean, that's important too, right? But the most important thing is what you never imagined, and how that changes you. And so I think the thing that's interesting in our, our new, hopefully to end soon era, but in, I guess, like this particular pandemic, starting in March, you asked about sort of like after the text ends. It's interesting, there's an in-between place for me, which is actually where I did find a lot of the sort of embodiment that I was searching for in terms of everyday experience through dance. Especially dance that involves like, dance is always what has, given me the time when I feel most alive, but I started to find these other kinds of dance, like contact improv and ecstatic dance. And so I felt like, oh, I kind of have about like 50% of the touch that I want in my life. And then in March, it went from 50% to 0, And so that was like the first effect. And I think I still, I'm still there, basically, But I think the thing that's interesting that I do think is an opportunity is that people, because of the coronavirus, because of this pandemic, people are more, they're forced to interact in public, right, with one another. So you see people like, someone will be standing outside someone's apartment window talking to them, or like, or people just sitting on a street corner, or I'll go to the park and it's like 45 degrees, and it's 8 p.m. It's pitch dark, and there's like people having a party, at a, and that kind of thing. Those things did not happen before, for the most part. But I think the thing about it though is that I don't see people drawing one another in. Again, for me, like, you're having a party in the park, you want people to join you, right? But no, not people. These people are like, hey, is there a person over there? We're like, whoa, we don't know that person. Or they'll like shine their flashlight on you in a park. I've never understood that. I'm like, why are we in the park? Do not shine a flashlight on me. Like, look at the trees, experience the world. And so I do think, I mean, what you're saying in terms of definitely at the beginning of the pandemic, I had friends who reached out because I have all these, dramatic chronic health problems that have been going on forever. And they reached out and offered to get me groceries once a week. And that's been like absolutely life-saving and beautiful. And so I do think there are those gestures, but I don't see it changing public space or public interaction in the ways that I hope that we can get there, right? But like, I don't see that happening yet.
Yeah. Can we talk about these freezer door passages? I mean, the ice cube. I mean, because I'm really trying to like, I don't have a theory of what is going on here. I just want to say it's fascinating to me, and it escapes my ability to conceptualize what's happening. Like, I have a couple thoughts, I do these sections of this dialogue between the ice cube and the freezer door, because I'm like an 18th century studies dork, like, you know, recall to me certain like it narratives from the 18th century, like when early literature often had these animate objects talking to each other, doing things. So, and also, but more even than that, I feel like you are, I don't know if you're doing this on purpose, but like borrowing certain like early modern conventions of rhetoric and like rhetorical argument. There's something around the circularity, the repetition of words, and these like, you'll like transform, you'll produce these kind of transformative arguments solely through kind of like the repetition of certain words in different contexts from one sentence to another. I'm not really sure how to describe this. It's like a very, very, very condensed form of aesthetic and rhetorically persuasive argumentation that I find very interesting. But the first, and before I get onto a whole jag about Walter Benjamin and what I think you're doing, which I might even get into later, I'm curious for you, like where these sections came from. They're very trippy, but I think they're also in a very odd way, draw on like very old school stodgy, you're not writing stodgily, but rhetorical argumentation, where you stage a certain argument through kind of like objects. Anyway, tell us more about these sections.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, those sections, they happen when the text can no longer hold. So when I've reached a point where I'm trying, like you said, I loved what you said about embodiment being lost, right? Because that is like a huge part of the book. And so it's when the embodiment itself, like, can no longer exist in the world. And so it has to go into this other world. And that world is where, in some ways, everything is condensed, right? It's condensed, it's simplified, it becomes almost fairy tale-esque, and I think that's what you're pointing to. But also it becomes, and I think this is also what you're saying, in a way, it's like these conversations about like morality almost, right? Or ethics.
Right.
When I was writing them, though, I didn't initially write them in the context of the book. I wrote them strangely. It was just, I like Twitter as a place where you can experiment with text outside of context. And so I just started writing these things that were about this conversation between an ice cube and an ice cube tray. And I just thought they were kind of fun and hilarious. And then people started reacting in these very emotional ways. And I was like, oh, is this emotional? And what I realized when I started putting them together and when I started arranging them in the book, like, I think in a different conversation, someone asked me about them, and I used the word innocent, you know, in a way. And I was like, innocence? I don't believe in innocence. But I think, you know, if we're talking about an ice cube and an ice cube tray, then I think it's okay to have some innocence, right? But I think it's where like I can no longer exist in this world, like as a body, right? And so what happens? And then it ends up allowing, I think, like a way to sort of talk about this, I guess broaden the possibilities for feeling. So it's like feeling on a different level. Maybe before you were feeling in one way, like in your body in a particular way. And then this comes about and you're like, whoa, what the hell is this, right? And so, and the intention is to shake the text out of context and to shake the context into a different kind of feeling.
Right.
And, but yeah, in terms of the text itself, it really is that moment where, where the text itself can no longer hold. And it's also interesting because I was like, what the hell are people going to think? You know, because of course it's the title of the book, right? And it's a central metaphor. And so it is really interesting to see, you know, I feel like in reviews or in, you know, people really relate to it and are really, you know, getting it. And a friend of mine actually called me up and said, you know, when she started the book, that she got to that part and she couldn't get past it because she just kept reading it over and over. She liked it so much because she related to it emotionally. And so that, I guess that's what I'm after in a certain sense. like expanding the possibilities for emotional engagement, not in a traditional way, but in a way that like jars you and throws you off balance. And I think actually your question, what you said earlier about Brecht, I would never have thought about that, but I actually think that's actually a really interesting comparison, like in terms of the staging almost, because like I think like the staging of argument and text and their dynamic between them, I guess.
Yes, no, I actually do see, I think I do visualize those freezer door sections as like a little mini stage, right? They're very visual because they're kind of like doing what's the word when like actors just read the text around a table read. It's like they're kind of doing like a table read because they're stuck in their location, right? And I really love this idea of those sections happening when the text can't hold. That's really totally fascinating. You didn't answer the question about where this text sits in your general trajectory that you have attested to in other interviews, not to hold you to it, of writing towards increasing vulnerability. It might be that I asked you like so many questions at once. Let's return to this question of vulnerability and where this text kind of comes into it for you, because I think what you'd said is that like earlier you described some works as memoir because that was the most vulnerable kind of framing for that text, not because it necessarily is memoir more than anything else is, because you easily, could have called this memoir, let's say, you call anything memoir right now, but, or you call anything a novel, but, how does this kind of calling it a lyric essay function as kind of like a heightened vulnerability to the text? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, for me, I think this is my most, well, I guess, yeah, like you said, I am always writing towards vulnerability. And for me, that the calling it a lyric essay for me means that it's unresolved, right? And so this quest for embodiment and for connection and for like a sense of self in public space and for those communal moments of possibility, that they will be unfulfilled, and but I think in a way, but it's not so much what I call it, but how I write it, to me, that makes it vulnerable, because I'm going into those places, I guess, where I'm just saying, like, I don't know if there's a space in the world for my body, for me to exist in a holistic way that will actually, and that includes the worlds that I've always believed in, like radical queer worlds with their visions of, intimacy and negotiation and mutuality, transformation, fluidity. But those worlds do not actually allow like me to exist in my fullest self. And when I say me, of course, obviously it's not just me, right? It's like lots of other people. And so for me, that's the vulnerability that I'm after, but also the unfinishedness of it. But I think the language, it's interesting because everyone writing about it is calling it memoir. And part of that might be because in my initial descriptive blurb, I used the term lyric essay, but that got cut out.
Okay.
So, but memoir, but it's interesting because I thought, it couldn't be memoir because let's see, did an ice cube and an ice cube tray have a conversation about graffiti art inside my freezer? I don't know. I mean, it's possible. So in that sense, I'm sort of glad, because I do see it as nonfiction. Like, and like that question you asked, that is what makes it more vulnerable. Like I could easily have called it fiction, but to me, this particular text becomes, because of how, because of talking about all of these moments of loss and craving, and especially I think failure of queer dreams, that I in some ways symbolize for people, you know, in certain ways, or embody. Like for me, calling it nonfiction makes it much more vulnerable than fiction. Even if people, because people read, you know, like my last book, Sketchtasy, was a novel, and that book contains, you know, invented characters who didn't actually exist in the world, but people read it as nonfiction, you know, because the character is very close to me, and because all the details are like you know, I'm like totally meticulous about Boston in 1995, you know, and also because I bring in similar themes, and also there are characters that I bring in that did exist in my life, but they do things that didn't happen at all, you know. So for me, that book became more vulnerable when I realized that it was a generational story about growing up with AIDS suffusing your desires and no way of imagining a way to live, basically. But not only that, because that is my generational story, but also that that the characters in that book, I don't know if they can escape Boston, you know, and all its hypocrisy, you know. Whereas I was like, this is the most horrible place on earth. I was there, I got stuck, but I got out. So in order for me to explore getting stuck, it had to be fiction, you know. Whereas in The Freezer Door, I also think, yeah, like incorporating all these different forms within this hybrid form also for me makes them more vulnerable, you know. Even the parts where, you know, the text just spins out, you know, like spins into, like, I guess, you know, some of what you're talking about, like the thing I realized, actually not, I don't know if I realized it while writing the book, but I realize it now, is that that language itself in the book is a form of embodiment. So like because I'm always thinking about the text inside the text, you know, and that elliptical structure, even just in the sentence that you were pointing to earlier, where, you know, like I might say one thing and then in the second half of the sentence it kind of reflects back on itself. Like for me, that's also a way to like shake language out of its stasis, and not just to shake it, but to shake it so that we can feel it more.
Wow, that's all amazing. It really is. And it's also really helpful writing advice to those of us who try to like ram through sections that don't, like, it would never even occur to me to just go with allowing a text to fall apart, rather than just ramming through some version of coherence that's like completely brought in from outside of the text. I'm sorry about the dog. He
He's cute.
never want to come to a reading. He was demanding to be picked up. It's so much of what you're saying is actually, you know, making me think. I was already like pre-thinking about Walter Benjamin because the Washington Post review of you describes your writing as flaneur-like, right? Like strolling through, right? So the Washington Post review says, with the probing, restless spirit of the flaneuse, Sycamore traces topographies of hurt and want during long walks on Seattle streets, mapped with the same precision showed to Boston in her third novel, Sketchtasy. So I was already thinking of, you know, your work as kind of drawing on that tradition. I don't know if you see it as drawing on that tradition. And then I was thinking about also like, there's a great, one of my favorite essays on Benjamin is by this, the art critic T.J. Clark, who writes kind of like a snarky essay on Benjamin called like, Should Benjamin Have Read Marx? And it's a really great essay, but it's about flaneuring, but it's also so much about the rain, which I think comes up around Seattle. And it's about something that I hadn't thought about, but that comes up, it came up with what you just said about like the weird way that we're in public now, where like, on the one hand, like you could see it as like, oh, it's the return of cruising. Like everything is conducted outside now. Like there's a total, you know, whatever we thought we had to do inside, we can no longer do inside at all. It takes place outside, but it's outside in this very sort of like walled off way that's like, you know, whatever, policed in a variety of other ways. But at any rate, if you will indulge me with this T.J. Clark quote, because it reminds me of the freezer door. He says, well, he's talking about the arcades, right? The Paris arcades, those malls, essentially with the glass ceilings that Benjamin's writing about, right? And he says, like, arcades, drizzle was their natural element. They did not keep out the rain so much as allow the consumer to wallow in rain publicly, his breath condensing drearily on the one-way glass. And then, rain guaranteed boredom, since it meant that one could not go out. The arcades allowed a whole century to be housebound and at loose ends in the company of strangers. They were eternal waiting rooms, caves containing fossils of the first consumers, mirror worlds in which gadgets exchanged winks, mephitic front parlors on endless Sunday afternoons with dust motes circulating in the half-light. Well, anyway, he loves his own writing, but this idea of worlds in which gadgets are exchanging winks actually did make me think back to the freezer door, though, where you've pivoted there's flaneuring outside the house and so much walking through Seattle, but then there's also, I think, sort of a flaneuring at home with this, but you've replaced the kind of consumer gadget exchanging winks with itself with this sort of product of domestic labor, the ice cube and the ice cube tray. Like, it's so much about, in a way, the reproduction of the self, but that's kind of like taken on a life of its own. You don't buy ice cubes, right? Usually. I mean, you can, but they're this product of domestic labor. Ultimately, right? Like, you filled the tray, you put it in there, and now it's kind of autonomized itself in that, what way that it's usually attributed to gadgets exchanging winks. Where am I going with this? It's a long, long way of asking if this post thing around you as sort of writing with the spirit of the flanneuse, if this has come up before for you, if that feels right to you as a way of describing your own writing, if that sort of like, there's a whole tradition of like city walking books, right? So many, and just walking books in general. And I just wonder if you set out to write a walking book, if it was for you kind of about the tradition of that sort of writing, or if it just kind of happened.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I definitely didn't set out to write in any tradition at all. Mm-hmm. And when I moved to Seattle, I love that you read that part about the arcades and the T.J. Clark and the rain. Because when I moved to Seattle in 2012, now I had lived here before, but that's the most recent time I moved here. And but I was like, how am I going to deal with the winter, right? Because the winter in Seattle is not cold by East Coast standards, but it's dark. It's dark for like 7 or 8 months, literally. Like you barely see the sun. And someone said, they were like, just get up and go outside and walk in it as long as possible. And that was the best advice ever, because the air, like in Seattle, when it's raining, like it's incredible. It's totally fresh, and it clears my head. And and so for me, like in my life, walking is really, it's just the way that I stay together, and also the way that it is. I mean, so I love the idea of being in, the tradition of the flaneur, because it is the same thing, right? I am out going outside for that experience that will change me, right? Even if it doesn't happen, but even if it's an experience with a tree, or with like the light between the branches, or the moon at night, or, the person who I think I'm going to have an interaction with who then jumps across the street. But so I think, I agree. I do think it's in that tradition, but I didn't intend it, So it's more of just that. I think it's like walking, and I guess it's become more and more the case. And obviously now it's like, again, this has changed for everyone, right? Because there's nowhere to go. We can't go inside anywhere. So So I generally go on a walk like for at least, I try to go for like a couple hours. I'm not walking the whole time, but I want to be outside, like in the light, because that's the thing that prevents that just like sinking into the ground where you're like, how am I ever going to do anything, you know? And then at night I go on a walk too. And so I think even if I don't have those interactions that I might crave in a certain sense, I'm still having that interaction with myself, you know, and that feedback between me and the world. And I do think in many ways that is what enables me to write, you know, like, because, like, I think, like, say, like, the beginning of the pandemic, you know, people where they're like, you can't go outside. I mean, you can go outside for walks, but people interpreted it as being like, I have to be inside. And I was like, oh my God, I need a doctor's note. Because I can't, that's not, I need to be able to move, you know? And so I think, but I also think the rain in Seattle, it's because it's such a constant presence, there's a way in which it, and it's not generally hard rain, you know, it's just rain. You're just like, oh, rain. But, one of the few things I absolutely adore about Seattle is like, people just go out, like, and they're walking around in the rain as if their hair is getting drenched. They're just walking around like nothing's happening. Like here, we see people with umbrellas and we're like, oh, they must not have lived here very long, right? You know, because they're like trying to keep it away, right? And so I think there is a way in which that enters the text, you know, as kind of not just an environmental aspect, but a like an underpinning of the environment in which the language takes place.
Yeah, that's incredible. Do you take notes when you're walking, or you just let yourself kind of, are you thinking about writing while you're walking?
Yes, well, it depends. What I'm trying to do when I'm walking is to only be present in what I'm experiencing. So, but sometimes I go outside and my mind is just like racing. And I'll be thinking through like, like literally a sentence or an idea. And then at a certain point, if I get it, you know, then I'm like, oh my God, I have to write things down when I think of them, because otherwise they're not really gone, you know, they'll come back in some form, but I feel like they're gone, you know, like I feel like, oh my God, I have this sentence, you know, if I don't write this down now, my life is over. Because I finally thought of it, like, so that way I don't have to like lie in bed in the middle of the night, like being, like writing a whole, because that will happen, like my brain is just like, so going on walks, the intent is to stop my brain, but sometimes stopping your brain allows your brain, at least mine, to reset itself. And like something that before I couldn't figure out, I mean, it's in my head, it's there, but I can't figure out how to articulate it in such a clear way, then it will just happen, you know? And those, so basically I'm like trying to stop myself, but also I will see things like, that are on my walk that I also want to know, you know, like there was this moment, like for several months, like I think in the summer, when, you know, I would just go out, like in this particular summer, you know, like, and I would just be struck by like devastating sadness of everything, you know, like even just something simple, like a bar that's on my corner that I've never seen closed, it was just like shut down, you know, and I just would start sobbing.
Right.
And it's that like that urban loneliness, right? That like, but the feeling like the urban is gone. We're in the urban, but it's not here anymore. But I started writing things down. I was just like, things that make me feel less lonely tonight. And it was just like a riff. And it would be like, you know, the light coming through, you know, the window panes or something, or the way this tree is growing diagonally, or leaning against the moss and realizing how tough it is, or and I started making lists of those. And again, sometimes I do like that, I just started putting on Twitter, you know, like, because again, I wanted the text out of context to see, you know, what textures does it create. So that's one way that, like, when I'm out in the world thinking that I'm also writing. But I think the main way is sort of like a reawakening almost, or a I guess the moment in my walk when I finally feel like everything slows down, that's when I'm like, oh, this is the walk, you know. Before that, I'm walking, but it's like exercise or something. But like exercise is not what I'm after. I mean, I am after exercise, but I want the place where like my breath stills and the world, like I'm in the world, you know, and the world, like I'm part of it. I'm not just, you know, like.
Yeah, that's great. I'm gonna have one more question, because then we're gonna have to take questions. We're already getting peppered with questions from the audience. One of the lines in here that really stuck with me was part of the dream of queer is that it potentially has no opposite. I'm sure a lot of people are going to quote this if they haven't already. Straight is the opposite of gay, queer is a rejection of both. Queer was one of the first words that spoke to me as the dream I needed in order to survive. I guess I'm just wondering, part of the dream of queer is that it potentially has no opposite. I mean, I love that. It's an interesting formulation. I'm wondering, you know, there's the book itself works through these mirrorings and oppositions throughout. And so it's interesting that there's this dream that I don't know that you have, or that the book has, of a kind of like non-oppositionalness. I guess I'm curious if the dream of queer feels like it is a livable reality to you, or if it's still one of these like not yet in that Jose Munosian like queer is not yet kind of vein. Maybe that's not really a fair question, but I'm asking it anyway, because you might be able to help us.
Yeah, no, I think, I do think, I mean, you know, everything that forms me, like when I was 19 and I moved to San Francisco in search of activism, in search of queers, in search of, and what I found, you know, sluts and whores and vegans and anarchists and outsiders and anarchists and dropouts and dreamers. And that's what formed me. And those are queer worlds, you know, not built on dominant straight or gay norms, right? And ways of like living and with, lusting for, and taking care of one another that are not predicated on anything we grew up with or anything we're told to believe in. You know, that's the dream, right? And I do feel like the dream is actualized in it was actualized in the sense that it created me, you know, like I exist as a different person because of those ideas, because of those people, because of the space that dream has allowed. And but I think at the same time, you know, I've always felt the failure, and I don't mean failure in sort of like the glamorized theoretical way that people take it, but I mean failure in terms of violence, you know, like the way in which people use these beautiful ideas like of accountability, mutuality, negotiation, transformation as ways to fuck one another over and get away with it, right? Because they'll be like, oh, that was you know, mutual aid, but they just like, you know, like literally, I mean, this happens a lot, you know, where people are like, or they're like to shun or like banish people, right? Because of minor infractions, you know? And so I think one of the things I'm looking at in the book is just like I really, you know, and I think, you know, The End of San Francisco, my previous, you know, the book that I called a memoir, in that book, I'm circling around, you know, this idea of San Francisco as a refuge for radical queer visions in community building, and all of the times that's let me down, and why I still believe in it, right? And so that book, I'm trying, in a way, like I see it as an exorcism, because I'm trying to exorcise this idea of San Francisco from my heart.
Yeah.
And of course, I still believe, though, in the same values, you know, and in the same dream. So I think it simultaneously, I don't think there is a world that you can join, or that I have not found, I should say. Maybe other people have found it, I hope. But I have not found a world that I can join, this queer world that is a substantive alternative at all times. You know, I think it's in moments, and then the other moments when it can sometimes be worse than what we grew up with, because when the people you believe in are the ones that are harming you, it can sometimes be worse than like the people you never believed in harming you, you know, like, and so I guess I would say that it is a dream that has not been actualized, but that doesn't mean we can't actualize it.
Thank you. This is amazing. Thank you for rolling with my questions, because before we started, I was like, is there anything you don't want me to ask? And you were like, no, but you know, who could have anticipated? Like, you would never think to say, like, don't unroll a giant T.J. Clark, you know, quote at me and then ask me to speak to the tradition of the Flaneur. Like, who could anticipate that this was going to happen? So you've been
I
very,
love it. I mean, I love the detail and the rigor and the beauty, really, of your questions and how they like roll into a kind of like they're beyond just analysis. They are also coming into the felt sense, I think, of the book in a certain way, and they also make me think. Like, you know, the best questions for me are questions that make me think in a way I wasn't expecting to think. So thank you so much for all of them.
That's very generous of you. Now, I don't know if they mentioned, but I'm gonna.
I know you're running away, which is
No, I'm not. I just almost flattered myself. I almost said, like, I'm gonna manhandle these questions. I'm going to siphon these questions towards you until 7:20, and then I have to go to another event, which I stupidly booked like too close to each other. So,
well, I mean, we might be done by 7:20, so you know, we got plenty.
Well, there's a lot of questions, Mattilda. There's already, and these people have been asking them while we're talking. So the first question is from wonderful Libby Flores. Mattilda, can you tell us what art, music, visual, etc., influenced the freezer door?
Oh, that's so interesting. I probably could. Let me think. Well, okay, I'm just gonna go in a total flow and just name a bunch of things that I think I was reading or experiencing while it was happening. I can't say exactly how they influenced it, or I could, but that would maybe take like a few hours. But I think actually, well, or also things that the text I think is speaking to that I might not have noticed when I was. Things that are obviously in the text, you know, David Wojnarowicz, Cloaks and Knives, well, Patti Smith's Just Kids, which I feel like is the most damaging book that has come out in the last several decades, and which I tear apart several times in the book. I guess that had some influence. My Body is a Book of Rules by Alyssa Washuda, Amina Kane, Creature, Claudia Rankine, Citizen, and Don't Let Me Be Lonely. Jafar Panahi movies. There's that documentary about Nina Simone. There's, I guess, the porn that I see in the bar, Pony. I don't know if that's art, but porn can be art. It usually isn't. But I think the experience of it can be a kind of art. Let me think. Other things that I think. Those are some that immediately come to mind. No, yeah, I was going to say something, but it's way past. It's like something I experienced way after the book. Those are some of the ones thanks for the question. Those are.
We have a great next question from anonymous attendee. I want to know if Mattilda is the tray or the cube or both.
Both. No, I don't know. Let me think about that for a second. Let me actually think, because that's the easy answer. if I was one more than the other, it would be the cube probably.
Okay.
But probably since I wrote it, I probably have to be both. But I think also it shifts, like any relationship, the dynamic shifts over time.
Okay.
But so it's interesting because the questions the Ice Cube are asked, I think the emotional reality of the Ice Cube is more like me. The questions the Ice Cube is asking would be maybe like a child's place of me, like asking for these answers that can't actually exist, and so maybe the humor in those responses is more like me, also at the same time, like explain anarchism to me. Nobody understands anarchism. Like that kind of question.
Yeah. That's so great. That was a great question. Okay, we have, oh no, I can never pronounce Polish last names. Linda Krawczyk, I'm sorry if that's wrong. Krawczyk. Krauzik. Anyway, my apologies. Lisa, I screwed all of it up, but guys, I'm old. I'm so old. So please, let's just, let me fall back on that here. What are you writing amidst pandemic? Has your writing process changed at all at this time in social isolation?
Yeah, I would say so. At the beginning of the pandemic, something like broke in my brain. I know what it is. It was because of the lack of touch. And so the question was about writing, but the first thing that happened, I couldn't read anything that had dead text. I could only read poetry or text that was spaced out. And my writing then was really, because I always am writing in the moment. So I'm always writing about, so I was writing about, what was happening to me. It was, similar, like I was experiencing the world, but it was different. And so I have, I don't know, a lot of that, and someone just asked me to write something, which I condensed all that writing, like including the kind of like things that make me feel less lonely tonight and my experience of the protests as they like shifted our experience of the pandemic. So that's one thing. But then the book that I started before, that I've been working on for a few years, which is called Touching the Art, which is about my relationship with my grandmother, who was an abstract artist, and how, as a child, she allowed me to imagine a creative life, in the world because I could go into her studio and live it. And then as an adult, she tried to renounce everything in order to get me to follow the narrow path of upward mobility that was everything that would destroy me. And then circling around, looking at her formations, like her generation, which is loosely the generation of abstract expressionism, and like placing her alongside artists that have been somewhat canonized, or, the women of abstract expressionism, and then also looking at like Jewish assimilation and the trajectory of white flight in Baltimore, which is where she's from. So anyway, there's that I have a draft, this sprawling, I don't even know what it is. And I'm trying to like edit it down into something more cohesive.
So you don't know, so like generically, you don't yet have like a container for how you would describe what this kind of writing is.
Well, that book, I would say it's a combination of memoir, biography, criticism, and those three in particular: memoir, biography, criticism, and essays. Yeah.
Very productive, Mattilda. Okay, from Adriana Jareb. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Hi, Mattilda. Thanks for the lovely reading. I'm wondering, how did you know you were done condensing the book? How do you know when you're done writing/editing?
I think the way I know, well, first of all, I'm not sure that I don't ever know entirely, but I think the best way I do with editing, because I am so neurotic and I will edit things like over and over and over. I think the way I know is when I start changing the same thing back and forth. So, and usually something small, I'll be like, oh my God, that and needs to be a with. And then I look at it again and I'm like, what was I thinking? Or I'll be like, that comma needs to go with the period. And then I go back and I'm like, oh my God, wow, that's destroying the whole text. It needs to be a comma. So when I go back and forth about those things, that's when I know I'm doing it.
I just want to give people an opportunity. There are some more questions on the queue, but if you want to ask any more questions, please put them in the Q&A. Mattilda, do you want to take a minute? I realize we might have done this in the beginning, but we didn't get to do it, to talk about some what other upcoming events. I know you have some big ones coming up. That just to let people know. I don't know if Bom can drop them in the chat for people, but just take note, people, because you have a lot. What do you have coming up?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for asking. Yeah, so I'm on a virtual book tour.
Right.
I'm doing it like a tour, which is kind of funny. So actually, I have 3 more events this week. Tomorrow I'll be at Skylight Books in LA. I mean, virtually, of course.
Right.
Felicia and Luna Limas. Then I'll be at City Lights the next day, and I'll be at Women and Children First in Chicago the day after that. Yeah, if anyone wants, you can go to my website, MattildaBernsteinSycamore.com. Someone has the motivation, feel free to put that link. And all the events. Next week I have, I'll be in conversation with Maggie Nelson at the Poetry Project. That's, I think, on Wednesday. The day before I'll be at San Francisco Public Library with C.A. Conrad. So yeah, there's a lot of excitement. So please keep coming out and like asking great questions. Oh, and I should say, at every reading, I'm reading a different excerpt. And I'll always be in conversation with someone different. And so it'll always be completely different. You won't have to hear that same part of the reading. And yeah, my goal is to make it completely different every time.
This is such a good, you have such a, good book tour. I don't know if you're like, well, I don't know if you're like one of these people who's relieved that they don't have to do it in person, or you're like sad about it. As an introvert, to me, it's like, oh, that sounds amazing. I mean, I do miss people, I'm going to say, but I mean, the travel, I find the travel very, sends me into like an existential swirl. I don't know if you're missing getting to do these things in person or not.
I miss the, yes. I mean, travel also destroys me, but I miss the feeling of, like, I love the conversations I'm having, like the conversation with you.
Yeah.
I love the questions, but for me, like a reading really is a collective experience.
Yeah.
Being in a room with people. And like also because I'm a very performative reader, I like to like sense exactly how people are feeling it. I love hugs after readings. I love people coming up to me, talking to me. On that note, if anyone, feel free to be in touch, in any way that's available for anyone. So, because I like that, I think whenever I'm done with the reading, and I know this will happen tonight, I'll be like, it'll end, and I'll be like in this like, whoa, adrenaline, like, whoa. And I'll be like, whoa, I'm in my apartment. This is weird.
Yeah, it's so weird. Okay, wait, we're getting a couple more questions because some came along in the chat, which I did not see, that came instead of the Q&A. So I don't know who this is from, but it's in the chat. I'm wondering if you've had experiences of belonging that have felt differently or even transformative to you in the process of bringing this book about questions and longing for belonging into the world. Do you want me to read that again?
No, I think that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that, that is why I write with vulnerability, right? And so I think when, when Amy Gall was interviewing me for Bomb, and she, sent the intro where she talked about crying, when reading the part about the ice cube tray. Like, for me, that's a moment of belonging, right? Or like when someone writes about, like those reviews in the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Baffler, where people are like really engaging, like so deeply, like with the work itself, with my body of work, with what it does to them. Like, I think that is why because sometimes I can be more vulnerable in my writing than I am, if I guess I should say, like in a relationship, when I'm vulnerable and vulnerable and vulnerable and the person never meets it, eventually I have to not be that vulnerable, right? But in my writing, I don't have to, like, and so So I think it does allow me always, and I think especially in this case, I think the thing that's really, because, you know, I'm writing when I wrote the book, or I imagined it being like very much about the present, right? I mean, books are always, you know, several years, you know, since I wrote it, but the present, you know, like in March completely changed.
Yeah.
And so I was like, what the hell? Are people going to be like, what is this? Like, it doesn't have any relation. But what's amazing is that I think because I'm writing about loneliness and alienation and a desire for touch, I think people understand the book now more than they would have if it came out a year ago. Because everyone is feeling that now. Whereas before, people have been like, oh, what's she going through? Now they're like, oh my God, I know what you're saying.
Yes, that's a great point. I think I have time to ask one more question to you before I go, and then I think we'll take over from Joey Carducci. I was thinking of asking how or why Mattilda decided on memoir versus novel. Where do you draw the line, or how do you decide when there's so much overlap? I'm not sure if that question is about, maybe it's not about this book, but in general, or, you know, where do you draw the line and how do you decide?
Oh yeah, totally. Well, I think I spoke to this before, so maybe this was in the chat before I answered it.
Yeah.
But definitely the question for me is about vulnerability. Like, what will make the text the most vulnerable is what enables me to, because it's not necessarily about whether this did or did not happen, which is generally conventionally how people think, like fiction, nonfiction. For me, it's about what will have the impact, you know, well, what will make it the most vulnerable? I think that's really the condensed.
Well, I feel like I've taken a writing seminar just being here. I find it very useful. All the things that you said about just, you know, your process. They're really, like, I think easy. They're not easy to come to on your own, but the way you explain how you work feels really easy to sort of attach to as an idea of how to work. And that it's, I don't know, that some people are just natural pedagogues, and I feel perhaps you're one of them, because that's really helpful to me. So thank you for helping me think about being more vulnerable with writing.
Oh, thank you, Jordy, for such like amazing questions and for all your depth of engagement. Like, it's incredible to have this conversation with you.
Oh, it's such an honor and a pleasure. It's weird to me that we were together in person a year ago.
2 years.
Was it 2 years?
I think.
Still feels like yesterday. For the Rhode Island launch of Sketchtasy, and here we are now in a totally different scenario, but it's great to see you again. I see that Ben has appeared. I'm going to let him take over, and so that I can urinate and then do my other talk, just to be gross. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jordy.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, Jordy. Thank you, Mattilda, too. That was really just such a wonderful conversation, and coming from your interview too, getting to spend more time sort of listening to your thoughts and kind of diving deeper into the book is really just such a wonderful opportunity. And I love what you were saying about how walking and language are different ways that allow us to sort of shake out of our stasis and kind of confront that urban loneliness, which, you know, we're on opposite coasts, but we're both living in cities, and these are not the cities that we're familiar with. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. It's been such an amazing conversation, and thank you to everyone at BOM for like having me, and thank you to everyone for your amazing questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everyone who attended and asked questions, and we're so supportive in the chat. It's wonderful to hear from you all. We've posted links to Greenlight's website, where you can purchase The Freezer Door by Mattilda Bernstein Sycamore. And you can also get Confessions of the Fox, Jordy's book, there as well. I will also just quickly note that since there's a few hours left, at least on the East Coast, in Giving Tuesday, BOM is a nonprofit. So if you're able, I hope you'll consider making a donation. And we'll have more great events and conversations in the future. Sign up for our email list, subscribe. Mattilda's interview is phenomenal, and I can't wait for you all to read it. Congratulations, Mattilda. It's a wonderful book, and I'm so delighted to see all the wonderful reviews that are coming in.
Oh, thank you so much for your support and engagement. This has been incredible.